Sunita Williams back on Earth, finally, after that mission on the ISS. Landed just a few weeks back on March 19th, 2025. Big news, plastered everywhere, you couldn't miss it. But got me thinking, beyond all the fanfare and the headlines, was her return really that big of a deal, or was this just like the media machine doing its thing, blowing it out of proportion?
It's an interesting point, actually. It really makes you think about how we, as a public,
Uh-huh.
receive these space events, how we're told what's important, what to focus on.
Yeah, exactly. Like, are we getting the full picture or just the carefully crafted narrative? And that's the kind of stuff we like to dig into here on the deep dive. Get past the surface and see what's really going on. And today we're diving deep, no pun intended, into a really interesting blog post by Dr. Hari Thaplial.
Ah, yes, Dr. Thaplial. A fascinating background he has.
It's crazy, right? Data science, project management, even AI and NLP. Seems like the perfect mix, wouldn't you say, to understand not just the science and logistics of the ISS, but also how all of this gets presented to us, the stories that get told, and why. So, for our listeners out there, today's mission is clear. We're going beyond the hype, past the headlines. We want to grasp what space exploration truly means, why some stories get so much traction, those aha moments. And we want to do it all without getting bogged down in, like, the technical jargon. So let's just jump right in, shall we? What is the International Space Station? I mean, really, what is it?
Well, at its core, it's a massive spacecraft orbiting our planet. Think of it as a research lab, but one that's operating as a completely unique environment. Microgravity in the vacuum of space. It's a truly remarkable example of what happens when nations work together, a testament to international collaboration. You've got NASA from the United States, Roscosmos, which is the Russian space agency, ESA, the European Space Agency, JAXA from Japan, and the CSA, the Canadian Space Agency, all working in concert.
Wow, all those agencies working together up there, it's just mind-blowing. Can you give us some, I don't know, some key facts, the kind of stuff that helps us truly understand the scale of this orbiting lab?
What really grabs you is the sheer size of it, combined with the environment it's in, constantly moving. It orbits at roughly 420 kilometers above Earth. That's about 260 miles. And it's moving at an incredible speed, something like 28,000 kilometers per hour, which translates to about 17,500 miles per hour.
Oh, that's really, really fast.
Oh, yeah. It's zipping around the Earth. And because of that speed, it completes a full orbit in about 90 minutes.
Wow, that means the astronauts up there, they experience a sunrise and sunset every 45 minutes. Talk about a messed up sleep schedule.
That's for sure. And there are usually 6 or 7 astronauts on board at any given time, though that number can jump up to 10 or even 11 during crew rotations or when they have special missions going on.
So a 90-minute day, a constantly changing crew, and you mentioned its size. How big is this thing, really?
Imagine something 109 meters wide. To give you a sense of scale, that's about the length of a football field. And it wasn't built all at once. The first module, called Zarya, went up in 1998, but they've been adding to it ever since, so it's constantly evolving, growing.
It's like a giant orbiting Lego set. And all those systems, all that equipment, needs power, right?
Of course. And up there, where else are you going to get power but from the sun? It's got these huge solar arrays capturing sunlight and converting it into electricity. That's how it keeps running. And to stay connected with Earth, the ISS uses a whole network of satellites, so they're constantly in contact with mission control centers down here.
So it's this massive, constantly moving, solar-powered. It's like a city in space, and it's all for research. Why go through all that trouble? What's the main point of the ISS, really?
It's more than just a spectacle, that's for sure. The ISS offers opportunities that we just can't get down here. Firstly, think of the science, the experiments they conduct up there. A lot of it just wouldn't be possible on Earth.
Because of gravity. Yeah.
Exactly. Gravity affects everything down here. But up there, in microgravity, it's a different story. You can study how fluids behave in a whole new way, how crystals grow without the pull of gravity. It opens up whole new areas of research.
Fascinating. So unique research opportunities. What else?
Well, as we touched on earlier, it's a shining example of international cooperation. All these different nations putting aside their differences to achieve something truly remarkable.
Working together towards a common goal up in space. Pretty inspiring when you think about it.
It really is. And lastly, it acts as a testing ground for future technologies. All the innovations we'll need for those deep space missions, like a trip to Mars, they're being tried and tested right now on the ISS.
Right, like a stepping stone to the next frontier. But this brings us back to Sunita Williams. Why did her return get so much media attention? I mean, there was an entire crew up there from different countries. It wasn't just her, right? Why the spotlight on Sunita, especially in the Western media?
That's where it gets interesting. Dr. Thapliel's blog post points out some really key factors. One of the biggest is media bias, plain and simple. News outlets, they tend to prioritize stories about people their audience can relate to, people who are like them.
So, American astronaut, American news. Makes sense. What else?
We can't forget the power of NASA's PR machine. They're really good at promoting their missions, their astronauts, and that translates into more media coverage.
They know how to tell a good story.
They do. Plus, the U.S. has a long history of leading in space exploration, going all the way back to the Cold War space race. That historical and political weight, it plays a role in how these events are perceived.
Right, the space race, that was as much about national pride as it was about science.
Absolutely.
Oh.
And then, more recently, you've got private companies like SpaceX and Boeing getting involved in space travel, transporting astronauts to the ISS. That's added another layer to this whole thing.
So more American companies in space equals more focus on American astronauts?
It seems that way.
Yeah.
And let's not forget, English is the dominant language in international news. So naturally, American astronauts communicating in English are going to get more coverage compared to their Russian or Chinese counterparts.
All good points. It makes sense. But Dr. Saplial also mentioned Sunita's name, the fact that she has an Indian name. What's the significance of that?
This is where it gets culturally interesting. Having an American astronaut with an Indian name, it creates a connection for people in India. It's like one of their own achieving something extraordinary, a sense of shared identity, pride even. And that resonates especially in India, which explains why there was so much media coverage there. Dr. Thaplial compares it to the attention Kalpana Chawla got after the Columbia disaster. Her story inspired a whole generation of kids in India to take an interest in space. So it's not just national pride, it's also about representation, cultural connection. It all contributes to why Sunita's return stood out, even among the other astronauts on the ISS.
Yeah, I see what you mean. It's a powerful thing, seeing someone who shares your heritage achieving something so amazing. And it's a good reminder that other space agencies, Roscosmos, ESA, JXA, China's CNSA, they all have their astronauts, their successes to celebrate. We just might not always hear about them as much in the Western media. But if you look beyond, expand your sources, you'll find the stories of Russian cosmonauts, European astronauts, Chinese taikonauts, they're all out there. Speaking of China, they aren't part of the ISS, are they? Why is that?
Good question. You hear so much about China's space program these days, so it seems odd that they wouldn't be involved in the ISS. The main reason boils down to politics. Back in 2011, the U.S. Congress passed something called the Wolf Amendment.
The Wolf Amendment sounds ominous.
Yeah, it basically prevents NASA from working with China on any space projects because of, security concerns.
So a political roadblock.
Essentially.
Yeah.
And faced with that, China decided to go their own way. They started developing their own space station, which they call Tiangong, which translates to Heavenly Palace.
Heavenly Palace, that's quite a name.
And it became fully operational in 2022, which was a huge moment for China's space program. They essentially said, okay, if we can't join the ISS, we'll build our own.
A bold move. So while the rest of the world was collaborating on the ISS, China was building its own space station. Tell us more about Tiangong. How does it compare to the ISS?
Well, there are similarities for sure. Like the ISS, it orbits at a similar altitude, about 400 to 450 kilometers.
Yeah.
In terms of size, though, it's smaller, about 1/5 the mass of the ISS.
Okay, so quite a bit smaller.
Yeah, for now. But it's designed to be modular, meaning they can add more modules to it later and expand it. Right now, it can hold 3 taikonauts for long-duration missions, with the capacity to go up to 6 during crew swaps.
So a smaller crew than the ISS, but with room to grow. And what about international collaboration? You said China was excluded from the ISS. Are they open to working with other countries on Tiangong?
Interestingly, yes. They've expressed interest in international collaboration on Tiangong. Countries like Pakistan, Russia, even the European Space Agency have shown some interest. So who knows what the future holds? Maybe one day Tiangong will become a truly international space station.
That would be amazing. A real shift in the global space landscape. And what kind of research are they doing up there on Tiangong?
Much like the ISS, they're doing all sorts of research. Biology, physics, material science, even medicine. Oh, and they're planning to launch their own space telescope called Suntian in 2025.
Their own space telescope? Wow, that's ambitious.
Very ambitious. People are comparing it to the Hubble telescope in terms of its potential, what it could tell us about the universe. It's a really big deal for space-based astronomy.
China's own Hubble. And all this is happening on Tiangong.
Yep, all on Tiangong. The core module is called Tian, which went up in 2021. That's where the crew lives, where they control the station. Then they've got two science modules, Wentian and Mengtian, both launched in 2022. Wentian is for life science experiments, and it also provides more sleeping quarters for the crew. Mengtian is focused on microgravity research and testing new technologies. They've already had several crewed missions to Tiangong, starting with Shenzhou 12, which was their first. They've had several more since then, with taikonauts living and working on the station for months at a time.
So they're really making progress.
Oh, absolutely. They've got big plans for Tiangong, adding more modules, inviting astronauts from other countries, using it as a training ground for their deep space exploration ambitions. It's a really exciting time for space exploration in China.
It really is. So much happening, both on the ISS and on Tiangong. But let's get back to Sunita Williams for a minute. Why all the fuss when she returned? I mean, there were other astronauts up there from different countries, and they had backup spacecraft in case of emergencies. Both a Russian Soyuz and an American spacecraft were docked, right?
Right. They're called lifeboats, emergency return vehicles. If something goes wrong with one spacecraft, the astronauts can use the other one to get back to Earth.
So there's a backup plan. What's the problem then?
It's complicated. We can't ignore the fact that there's, a lot of tension between the U.S. and Russia right now, politically speaking, and that spills over into space, even though the ISS partnership is still going strong. In an emergency, using each other's spacecraft, well, that's one thing. But for routine returns, it gets tricky.
Because of politics.
Exactly. And then there's the fact that NASA is a publicly funded agency. They're under a lot of pressure to keep American astronauts safe. Any perceived risk gets magnified, becomes a big media story.
The public wants to know their astronauts are coming home safe.
Absolutely. Yeah. And don't forget, after the space shuttle program ended in 2011, NASA was completely reliant on Russia's Soyuz spacecraft to get their astronauts to and from the ISS. It wasn't until SpaceX's Crew Dragon came online in 2020 that they had another option. So all that reliance on Russia, it probably added to the drama, when it came to astronaut transport.
So it's not just about the technicalities of spaceflight. It's about politics, public perception, international relations. It's a whole tangled web. But the bottom line is they did have backup options.
Yeah, the risk wasn't as high as it might have seemed. But you can't ignore the diplomatic complexities, the logistics of relying on another nation's spacecraft. It's a delicate balance.
Delicate balance, indeed. Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about the ISS itself. It's an amazing feat of engineering, a massive structure built piece by piece in orbit. Can you walk us through some of the key parts of the station, how it all fits together?
To think they built this massive thing in space, piece by piece, boggles the mind.
A true testament to human ingenuity.
It really is. So the ISS is modular, which means it's made up of different parts, modules, that are built by different countries and then connected together in space. The core modules, those are the main living and working spaces for the astronauts. Let's start with Zarya, the very first module.
Zarya, wasn't that launched by Russia?
Yep, back in 1998. It provided power and propulsion in the early days of the station. Then the U.S. launched Unity later that same year. Unity is like a connecting hub linking the U.S. and Russian parts of the station. And then you have Zvezda, launched by Russia in 2000, which provides living quarters for the crew, life support systems, and it's the main control center for the Russian segment.
So Russia launched the first and third core modules. What about the U.S.?
They launched Destiny in 2001, which is their main science laboratory. Then there's Harmony, launched in 2007, which connects different modules and provides docking ports for visiting spacecraft. And Tranquility, launched in 2010, houses more life support systems, an exercise area, and even a cupola, which is like a big bay window with amazing views of Earth.
A bay window in space? I can only imagine the view. What about the other international partners?
Europe launched their Columbus laboratory in 2008, and Japan launched their Kibo laboratory, which means hope, the same year.
Yeah.
And we can't forget Canada. They built the Canadarm2, which is this amazing robotic arm.
Yeah, the Canadarm2, I've seen videos of that thing. It's incredible. It's like a giant robotic arm in space, moving things around, capturing spacecraft.
It's essential for assembling the station, doing repairs, all sorts of tasks, and it was launched in 2001, so it's been up there a while doing its thing. Then there's the Integrated Truss Structure, or ITS, which is like the backbone of the station. It supports those massive solar arrays that provide power, and also the radiators that keep the station from overheating. The solar arrays themselves were built by both the U.S. and Russia. Russia also provided the Pirs and Poise docking modules, which have airlocks for spacewalks, launched in 2001 and 2009. And the Razvet module, which went up in 2010, is used for storage and provides another docking port.
Wow, so many modules, so many different systems. It's mind-boggling.
It is. And more recently, in 2021, Russia launched the Nauka laboratory, which also provides more living space for the crew. And they launched the pre-shuttle docking module the same year. So it's a truly international effort. The U.S. provided key connecting modules, labs, and the main power system. Russia provided early power and living quarters, more science labs, and docking mechanisms. Europe and Japan added their specialized labs, and Canada built that indispensable robotic arm.
A global effort, a triumph of international cooperation. And all this is happening while orbiting the Earth at an incredible speed. How does it all actually work, like on a day-to-day basis?
Well, it's maintaining its orbit, staying up there at around 400 to 420 kilometers, flying at that crazy speed of about 28,000 kilometers per hour, which, as we said before, means a 90-minute orbit, a 45-minute day-night cycle. The solar panels are constantly generating electricity, about 120 kilowatts, to power all the systems and the experiments they're running.
And what about air to breathe? Clean water?
Life support is a whole other challenge. They have to constantly filter out carbon dioxide and generate oxygen using electrolysis.
Electrolysis, that's where they split water molecules using electricity, right?
You got it. And speaking of water, it's precious up there, so they recycle it as much as possible. Food, equipment, all the supplies they need, that gets sent up regularly on cargo spacecraft.
So it's a closed-loop system as much as possible. And there's the crew, those 6 or 7 astronauts representing all those different space agencies. What are they doing up there all day?
They're busy monitoring systems, conducting experiments, fixing things that break, the everyday stuff of living in space. And to communicate with Earth, they rely on those satellites we mentioned earlier, constantly sending and receiving data.
It's like its own little world up there, its own little ecosystem. And it won't be up there forever, right?
Yeah.
What's the plan for the ISS? Will it stay in orbit indefinitely?
The current plan is to keep it operating till 2030. After that, they're going to deorbit it. That means guiding it back into Earth's atmosphere in a controlled way.
So it won't just stay up there forever, becoming a piece of space junk.
Nope, they'll bring it down safely. Most likely, it'll splash down in a remote part of the ocean. As for the future of space stations, it seems like we're moving towards commercial stations built by private companies. NASA's also working on the Lunar Gateway, which will be a station that orbits the moon, kind of like a base camp for lunar missions.
So maybe one day we'll have hotels in space, space tourism.
It's not out of the question. And China's Tiangong, that could become a major hub for international research as well. So it's a changing landscape, exciting times for space exploration. Now, can we talk about something that always bugs me? The term zero gravity, we hear it all the time, but is it really accurate?
Yeah, you always see those astronauts floating around, but there's got to be some gravity up there, right?
There is. It's a common misconception. At the ISS's altitude, about 430 kilometers, gravity isn't zero. It's actually still pretty strong, about 8.7 meters per second squared. To compare, on Earth's surface, it's about 9.8. So a little weaker up there, but definitely not zero.
Okay, so if there's still gravity, why are those astronauts floating?
That's the thing. What we see is weightlessness. It's not the absence of gravity. It's actually because the ISS is in a constant state of free fall. It's falling towards Earth, but at the same time moving forward so fast that it keeps missing the planet. It's essentially falling around the Earth.
So it's like a constant state of falling.
Exactly. And the astronauts inside are falling at the same rate as the station, which is why they feel weightless. It's similar to that feeling you get in an elevator when it starts going down quickly. That sort of butterflies in your stomach feeling.
I see what you mean. So it's not about a lack of gravity, it's about falling in a controlled way. And that brings up a somewhat silly question. If there is gravity up there, could an astronaut just, jump out of the ISS with a parachute and float gently back down to Earth?
I don't think so. A nice thought, but not quite how it works. Even if an astronaut jumped out, they'd still be moving at the same speed as the ISS, which is incredibly fast, that 28,000 kilometers per hour. So they wouldn't fall straight down. They'd just keep orbiting the Earth, becoming another piece of space debris alongside the ISS.
Right, because even with a parachute, there's not much air to slow you down at that altitude, is there?
Nope. The atmosphere up there is extremely thin, almost a vacuum. So the parachute wouldn't really work. The astronaut would just keep orbiting until their speed slowly decreased due to, a little bit of atmospheric drag. And eventually they would re-enter the atmosphere, but at such a high speed, the friction would generate so much heat, they would most likely burn up.
Okay, so no jumping out of the ISS with the parachute. That's off the table. How do astronauts actually get back to Earth safely?
It's a much more controlled process. They use spacecraft like the Russian Soyuz or the American Crew Dragon.
Mhm.
These spacecraft are designed to detach from the ISS and then fire their engines in the opposite direction of their travel, slowing them down. That's called a retrograde burn.
Retrograde burn, so they're braking in space.
Exactly. That allows Earth's gravity to start pulling them back in. And they have to enter the atmosphere at a very precise angle. Too steep, and they burn up. Too shallow, and they might skip off the atmosphere and back into space.
Talk about high stakes.
It's all about precision. And these spacecraft, they have heat shields to protect them from the intense heat of re-entry. Once they're lower down, where the air is thicker, they deploy parachutes to slow them down even more for a safe landing. The Soyuz lands on land in Kazakhstan, while the Crew Dragon splashes down in the ocean. Both use parachutes for the final part of the descent.
So a lot more complicated than just jumping out with a parachute.
A bit more, yes.
Okay, there's so much specialized vocabulary associated with spaceflight. Can we take a minute to define some of the key terms?
A little spaceflight glossary. Sure, that would be helpful.
Let's start with rockets. Sometimes they're called launch vehicles. What are they exactly?
Well, rockets are the powerful machines that provide the thrust, the power, to get everything off the ground and up into space. They have to overcome Earth's gravity, which is no easy feat.
And there are different types of rockets, right?
Yes, for ISS missions, you've got SpaceX's Falcon 9, which launches their Crew Dragon and Cargo Dragon spacecraft. And then there's the Russian Soyuz rocket, which carries the Soyuz spacecraft. NASA's also got their Space Launch System, or SLS, but that's more for deep space missions, not so much for going to the ISS.
Okay, so rockets are the workhorses, getting everything up there. What about once they're in space?
Once they're in orbit, the spacecraft separates from the rocket. And there are different types of spacecraft. You have the crewed spacecraft, which carry the astronauts.
Like the space shuttle, which is retired now, right?
Yeah, the shuttle's gone.
Yeah.
But there's still the Soyuz, which is Russian, and SpaceX's Crew Dragon. And Boeing was working on their Starliner, which is still in testing.
So different options for getting humans to and from the ISS. What about supplies?
That's where cargo spacecraft come in. They bring up food, equipment, experiments, all the things the astronauts need. And they also take away the trash.
Space garbage. What happens to that?
Some of it gets burned up in the atmosphere, but that's a whole other topic. For cargo spacecraft, you've got the Russian Progress, SpaceX's Dragon Cargo, the Cygnus, which is built by Northrop Grumman, and the Japanese HTV, which is retired now. Oh, and there's a new one coming online soon, the Dream Chaser, built by Sierra Space. It'll be reusable, which is pretty cool.
Reusable spacecraft, very sustainable. And then there's the ISS itself, which is kind of like a giant spacecraft built from all those modules we talked about. It's a space lab, a place to live, and it allows humans to stay in space for long periods.
Exactly. A home away from home, hundreds of miles above Earth.
What about all those robotic arms and docking mechanisms you mentioned? Those sound pretty high-tech.
Yeah, they are. They fall under the category of space robotics and docking systems. The Canadarm2, that's the robotic arm built by Canada. It's amazing. It can grab incoming spacecraft, move equipment around outside the station. It's like a giant Swiss Army knife in space.
A Swiss Army knife that costs millions of dollars.
Something like that. And it has this hand called the latching end effector, or LE, which is used to grab things. And then there are docking adapters built by both NASA and Roscosmos that let different spacecraft connect to the ISS safely.
So it's like a giant space puzzle with all these different parts fitting together. What about spacewalks? Don't astronauts need special suits for those?
Of course. That's where spacesuits and EVAs come in. EVA stands for extravehicular activity, which is just a fancy way of saying spacewalk. And they use special suits for those, the American EMU and the Russian Orlan.
So spacesuits are like mini spaceships, keeping the astronauts alive outside the station.
Pretty much. They provide oxygen, regulate temperature, protect against radiation. They're essential for doing any work outside the station.
And when it's time to come home, there are those re-entry and landing systems.
Exactly. Those are the technologies that get the astronauts safely back to Earth.
Yeah.
Like the Soyuz capsule, the Crew Dragon, and the Boeing Starliner, which will be used soon. Each of those spacecraft has its own way of landing.
So from launch to landing, it's a whole symphony of technology all working together. Now, I want to go back to how those ISS modules got up there. They weren't carried by the crewed spacecraft, were they?
Nope. The modules were launched on rockets, just like the spacecraft. But they're different things. The modules are like the building blocks of the station. They stay up there permanently. The spacecraft are more like taxis. They come and go.
And the astronauts assemble the modules in space, right?
Yep. Using robotic arms and lots of specialized tools. It's a delicate and dangerous job. Do you want to hear about which rockets launched which modules?
Absolutely, I'm curious.
Well, the first one, Zarya, that went up on a Russian Proton K rocket back in 1998. Then, later that year, the U.S. launched Unity using the Space Shuttle Endeavour.
The space shuttle, that was a big part of the ISS program, wasn't it?
It was. Zvezda, the third core module, was launched by another Proton K in 2000. And the U.S. Destiny Lab went up on the Space Shuttle Atlantis in 2001.
So both American and Russian rockets played a role in building the ISS.
They did. And the Space Shuttle was used to launch several other modules. Harmony went up on Discovery in 2007. The European Columbus Lab and the Japanese Kibo Lab both went up on Atlantis and Discovery in 2008. And Tranquility went up on Endeavour in 2010. And more recently, the Nodeka module was launched on a Russian Proton M in 2021.
It's amazing to see how these different countries, with their different technologies, all came together to build this incredible structure. You mentioned the space shuttle a few times. What was a space shuttle flight like? I mean, it wasn't just a rocket, was it?
No, the space shuttle was something else. It was a reusable spacecraft that could launch like a rocket, orbit the Earth like a satellite, and then land back on Earth like an airplane.
Launch like a rocket, land like a plane. That's crazy.
It was a marvel of engineering, truly. Its
Yeah.
main job was to transport astronauts, cargo, and those ISS modules we talked about. The program ran from 1981 to 2011.
30 years, wow. And how did they launch it and land it?
It launched using its own engines and two solid rocket boosters, all fueled by a big external fuel tank. Once it was in orbit, it could release satellites, conduct experiments, and of course it played a huge role in building the ISS. It transported modules, carried the astronauts who did the spacewalks, and it used its own robotic arm, Canadarm, to help assemble the station.
The shuttle sounds so versatile, like a multi-tool for space.
It was. The main parts were the orbiter, which was the part that looked like a plane and carried the crew and the cargo, the solid rocket boosters, which provided extra thrust during launch, the external fuel tank, and the Canadarm.
And they were able to reuse parts of it, right?
Yeah, the solid rocket boosters were recovered and reused. The external tank, though, that was discarded after each launch.
Okay, so a partially reusable system, and it was used for all sorts of missions, right?
Oh, yeah. The first one, STS-1, was in 1981. A test flight to see if the whole thing actually worked, and it did. STS-88 in 1998, that's the one that launched the first U.S. module for the ISS, Unity. It connected Unity to the Russian Zarya module, marking the beginning of the station's assembly. Then there was STS-107, which that was the Columbia disaster in 2003, a tragic reminder of the risks involved in space travel. And the last mission, STS-135, that was in 2011, the end of an era.
The Columbia disaster, that was heartbreaking. It's amazing what they achieve in space, but it's not without risks. Why did they retire the space shuttle program? It seems so capable.
A few reasons. For one, it was incredibly expensive to operate. Each mission cost hundreds of millions, sometimes over $1 billion. And the two disasters, Challenger in 1986 and Columbia, those really highlighted the risks. Plus, new spacecraft were being developed, like SpaceX's Crew Dragon and the Soyuz. Those are safer and cheaper to operate. So the time had come for the shuttle to retire.
It makes sense, but it's still sad to see such an iconic vehicle go. Okay, last question about rockets. We've talked about them launching modules and spacecraft, but what happens to the rockets themselves? Do they just float around in space forever?
Most rockets these days are multi-stage, which means they have different parts that separate during the launch. The first stage is the big one, the one with the powerful engines that lifts the whole thing off the ground. For reusable rockets, like SpaceX's Falcon 9, that first stage comes back down to Earth and lands, either on a drone ship in the ocean or back at the launch site.
So they can use it again.
Exactly. Saves a lot of money and resources. But for non-reusable rockets, like the Russian Soyuz and Proton, or NASA's SLS, the first stage just falls back to Earth and is usually destroyed. They usually land in the ocean or in remote areas.
So it depends on the rocket. What about the rest of the rocket, the parts that don't come back down?
The second stage, the one that carries the spacecraft the rest of the way into orbit, that usually burns up when it re-enters the atmosphere. If it's in a high orbit, it might stay up there for a long time.